Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, coming to you with your next mental health moment. And today I want to do things a little different. I just want to have a conversation. I want to have a conversation about a special group of people who deserve more than one day a year to be celebrated and to be honored. And that is our veterans of our United States military forces. November 11th is Veterans Day, but that is not the only conversation we need to have about veterans. It's celebrating them and their families and their service on that day, but it is a part of ongoing conversations that need to happen as we really think about what it is like for our veterans who have a lot of transitions that they deal with. Now, we know that we're in a period of transition right now, and we have not adjusted well. If we think about having to be at home with our children, having to figure out how to school them virtually, and even before the virtual learning was in place, when the pandemic hit us back in March, and not even really having a plan what that was like, that moment of trying to figure out, okay, how do we handle this? What do we do? The rules are different now than they used to be, and so how am I supposed to manage that? That's just a taste of what our veterans experience. So here a person is transitioning out of military service, and there could be a lot of reasons for that transition. There could have been injury. So now I may be dealing with injuries related to my time of service, and those could be very life-changing injuries, including traumatic brain injury, which now I'm having challenges with memory and mood and affect regulation, and it is causing challenges in my relationships with people. Maybe I lost an eye, maybe I lost an arm, a leg, maybe both. And I back problems, knee problems, so I'm dealing with chronic pain, numbness, tingling. And so here I am. Now I'm just maybe in my 20s still, depending on how long a person served, 30s, 40s. And I am coming out and I'm having these types of challenges that I'm dealing with. And how am I supposed to transition to dealing with these challenges? It is tough dealing with ongoing medical conditions, particularly those that you know are going to be chronic. These aren't things that necessarily will go away. These are things I'm going to have to be dealing with for the rest of my life. And the rest of my life can seem really far away in my 20s, 30s, and 40s. So on top of dealing with that transition, I'm leaving the environment of the military, which is a very structured system. The rules are different. The respect level is different. The communication is different. And now I'm transitioning over into the civilian world, which has a completely different set of rules and standards and interactions. And that can be a tough transition. If you've ever worked in a culture, for example, that was very, very structured, you had your chain of command. We don't necessarily look at it the same way in the civilian world, but we do have that hierarchy in place. Right? So we have supervisors we go through. We may have to vet information that before it goes out, right? So we have these things, but they look a little different. So we know how to navigate that as civilians because that's what we're used to. But here comes a veteran who is trying to figure that out. And then possibly because they went into the military right after high school, now they're also trying to figure out what's going to be my next career option. I may need to go to college, and how do I access that? What would I study in college, especially if I've got some of these challenges with my memory or post-traumatic stress disorder, which is often the most invisible wound that comes along with service. And so I've got nightmares and flashbacks, and I'm not comfortable around people. I'm vigilant. I don't like my back being turned to the public. I'm really cautious about being in places that are open, that I can't protect myself. Right here I am on a college campus, and there's all these open areas, and I could just think about all the potential dangers that could come along with that. But even beyond that, I haven't been in school since I was 18 years old. And so here I am now 10, 20, 30 years later, and I'm trying to figure out, how do I even navigate a college environment? I do not have much in common with these students who could very easily be my children and how they're looking at me. And that's another part of this conversation, which is how we look at our veterans, how we see them. Do we actually even see them as they're making these transitions and trying to figure out how to exist in this civilian world? How do we view them? We view them as difficult frequently. We view them as very rigid, and there's not to say that there may not be some of those things in place, but I think we often do stereotype veterans and make assumptions about people who have served in the military. We sometimes have difficulty communicating with them in the same ways they have difficulty communicating with us, and we tend to like people to have to adjust to us. So you're in the civilian world, you need to adjust, and we don't often take the time to really talk to people about how to make that transition, how to adjust when you're trying to figure out what your identity may be, right? So if I'm no longer in the military, and this has been a prominent part of my identity for 20 plus years, how am I supposed to function now trying to figure this out? And let's not even talk about all the things that I've missed out on when I've been serving. Maybe I was in school and I got deployed, and so I had to stop my education and go and make sure that my country was safe, that I was doing everything to protect the borders. So now my schooling has been interrupted, and we know when schooling gets interrupted, sometimes we don't always get a chance to get back to it. So maybe I've got things that I was not able to do, and time has passed me by, and now I'm wondering if I'm going to be able to do it. And the effect just on my family. Those birthdays I missed, those anniversaries I missed, and even though I'm serving my country, guess what? My kids are still resentful. My wife is still resentful because they had to do all of these things, experience all of this life without me. And even though they understand it was for a cause greater than them, it still hurts. And so we're trying to patch relationships if we can salvage them. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. Sometimes marriages end up being casualties of service. And oftentimes people lose connections to people. There's all this moving. And how do I keep in contact with people when we've moved so much, right? That's one of the things that kids can sometimes get resentful about, is that they feel like they've moved around and they haven't been able to take roots anywhere. I think that we don't often think about the challenges associated with just even being able to try to get back to a place that feels like a normal. Because I can't unsee and unexperience what I did. It's still there, it's still present with me. So those are things that I think about daily. Do you know how much of a challenge sometimes it is for our veterans even to sleep consistently past 2 hours, past 4 hours? Most of us can get to sleep fairly easily, 7-8 hours. Some of us can get 9. There are people that their sleep is literally very troubled, and so they don't rest peacefully. And just think about that for a minute. Here's a person who sacrificed so that we can have peace, so that we can be safe, and yet they walk around and there is no peace for them. And then let's add on top of that, what if you don't get your benefits before you get out of the military? Let's say that you were unable to, and possibly because you didn't want to say that you had some of these challenges, that you experienced some of these health problems. You didn't come in as an 18, 19, 20-year-old with all of these health problems, but you're leaving and you got the health problems of someone that might be 70. And so now you are struggling with trying to balance that. But right, the military culture is, hey, look, you got to keep going. We need you to be present. We need you to be alert. We need for you to look out for your fellow brothers and sisters. And so we don't really have time to attend necessarily to these health problems, to these mental health problems that you're experiencing. And don't get me wrong, I think the military has come a long way in being able to offer services and recognize the need for services. And that includes transition out of the military. But there is still a stigma associated with telling someone that you're struggling. How is that going to affect me in my career? How is that going to affect me after my career? If I am labeled, am I going to be able to get a job after I leave the military? Are people going to see me as broken? Here are warriors who have gone to combat, who have served, who in a variety of different capacities, our medical officers, our legal officers, people that have worked their way up through the military ranks and who are very deserving of being able to get all the benefits that they worked hard for, but that doesn't always happen. And so now I'm not able to get the necessary services I need. And then we know that the VA is overwhelmed. We know that it is not always easy for everyone to access services. Some people are waiting long periods of time to be able to get into those VA services. Some people aren't able to see their providers as much as they would like to because their appointments may be a month out, 2 months out before they can get in. And you know, people are working as hard as they can in the VA system, but there are a lot of veterans. And if that is my only access point to be able to go to VA, I have to deal with that. And so I may not necessarily be able to get everything that I need, right? So sometimes we're putting Band-Aids on things. And then veterans don't often necessarily want to go to groups to talk about their trauma or talk about things that they're struggling with. There's a pride there. And again, to say that I am struggling can be challenging. And so I may not really be honest. And there is this, we get used to pain. The longer you deal with things, right, the more they become normal for you. And so I don't even realize that I'm dealing with all of these things because I've been dealing with them for so long. So whatever the reason, our veterans don't get the services they need to prior to getting out of the military. And so then it becomes even harder to access those services once they're out. Then you add on top of that, now I'm trying to figure out how to cope. And so let's say I am using alcohol to cope. I'm using marijuana to cope. I'm using other substances to cope. I may be engaging in things to just help numb, trying to get some sleep. I might be, narcotics. I might be trying to just deal with so much pain and so much restlessness and irritability. And I am trying my very best to just stay afloat. And then I get a DUI. Or then I end up doing something that causes me legal problems. Maybe I'm at a place, maybe I'm at the VA and I'm frustrated and I'm expressing my frustration. And so now I'm being carted out for making a terroristic threat. Then there's the risk of me losing my benefits. All right, so here I am struggling, and we have seen this. We have seen veterans homeless. We have seen veterans out on street corners begging for food. We have seen veterans trying to get change. We've seen them sleeping outside, right? The people that have gotten thrown away, the people that have gotten forgotten, the people who we try to pretend like they don't exist, like we don't see them. So add legal problems on top of all of the other things that I'm dealing with. And so now we begin to recognize where there's so much mental health, why the suicide rate among veterans is so high, because I am dealing with all of these layers of things, all of these challenges. And I may have some battle buddies that I may be talking to about it, but they may be the only people I feel safe to talk through these things with, because maybe I don't want to be hospitalized, or maybe I'm afraid of what may happen if I'm honest. And maybe my family can't handle things, or I don't want to talk to my family about these things because I know that once I tell them, they'll be etched in their brain, and I don't want to have anybody experience the same thing that I'm experiencing. So I'm internalizing all of this. I'm carrying all of this around on my own. So when I want to have this conversation, I want to be clear with you that veterans, they're people. They are people who, and some of them transition out of the military and they go on to have careers and they do well. And we don't necessarily talk about them, but don't think they're not struggling too. Don't think that there's not pain that they're dealing with. Don't think that there is not, and everybody didn't go to combat, but that doesn't mean they aren't dealing with the effects of being in the military, carrying all that heavy equipment around, all the running, the wear and tear on the body, right? That we do when we're young. We don't think about it because we're youthful and we have that energy and exuberance and that ability to heal, but that doesn't last forever. And so when I come out, I could still be dealing with any number of those things. Or maybe I've lost people. Maybe people that I grew to have very close relationships with didn't come back from a deployment or completed suicide, right? So I'm dealing with all this loss, even if I've never seen war. And I think sometimes we think, well, there's nothing wrong with you. You didn't experience combat. But we know that there is trauma from hearing other people share their trauma, a real threat being out there, that potential. So there's a lot of ways that people can experience trauma. I typically in these videos like to provide resources and support for people. But today I really just want to have a conversation with you. I want you to see our veterans. I want you to advocate for Veterans Court so that when veterans are arrested or charged, that they are able to get help when they need help. Everybody doesn't necessarily need to go to jail because they broke a law, right? So we need to decriminalize some of the things that we're arresting people for, and even reasons why people end up getting kicked out of the military, because people deal with trauma inside the military too while they're still actively serving. And then you're kicked out and you don't have these benefits, right? So there are some things that we need to look at, we need to address. So this is, we just finished the big presidential election. This is still some season for runoffs. But as you're thinking about electing officials, as you're thinking about district attorneys, as you're thinking about prosecutors, as you're thinking about elected officials, make sure that they all have a platform to support our veterans. Make sure that you are supporting organizations that help our veterans. Make sure that when you see that person who has that sign up or wants to spray your window, and I understand that all of us don't feel like money is the way to go, but if you see someone hungry and you have an opportunity, then feed them. If you see someone cold and you have an opportunity to clothe them, then cover them. If you see someone struggling with mental health and you know that they may not have accessed benefits or don't know how to access benefits, then connect them with organizations that do. No one that's a veteran should have to fight for their right to be seen, whether that's at a medical provider's office, a mental health provider's office, or just being out in public. They should not ever have to fight for a right to be seen. So to honor our veterans, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you to your families who also were a part of that service and sacrificed so that you could keep us safe. And I want you to know that we see you, and we are going to do our very best to make sure that we advocate for you to get what you deserve, what you've already paid for and sacrificed for and given so much for. So when you see someone who has served, make sure you thank them for their service, and also just check in with them and ask them how they're doing, because sometimes it's just nice to know that people care. Be encouraged.